Hello, I am here again with the third part of my presentation on eco-criticism. In the first part, we have already discussed what eco-criticism is, its brief history and growth, as well as the four waves of eco-criticism. The second part dealt with the concepts and beliefs associated with eco-criticism. In this third part, we will discuss eco-criticism in practice. So, let us start with Slavic words, again brushing up what eco-criticism is. He says that eco-criticism is the study of nature writing by way of any scholarly approach, or conversely the scrutiny of ecological implications and human nature relationships in any literary text. So literary texts are interpreted from a nature point of view. Ecocritics therefore tries to contextualize the literary works to make an analysis of the ideologies and practices that are prevalent in human society concerning nature, and then try to evaluate its outcome in the form of assessment and evaluation of how human culture treats nature as inferior and devalues it. So this gives us a clear picture of the present scenario. An eco-critic, after studying this, can interpret the text in a better way. Grotfelty has enumerated several questions that an eco-critic asks as a custom. He has included various forms of literature. So if a critic is analyzing a poem, a sonnet, then he would first try to know how nature is presented in this sonnet. Then if it is a novel, whether nature is only a physical setting or something else. Then are the values expressed in this play consistent with ecological wisdom? So if the play is taken up, then he tries to understand whether the values that are expressed in the drama is in consonance with the ecological wisdom. Then he questions, how do our metaphors of the land influence the way we treat it? So here the language also comes under examination. Then how can we characterize nature writing as a genre? So these are all the basic questions put forward by any critic who wants to interpret a literary work from ecological point of view. To proceed, he also questions, in addition to race, class, gender, should place also become a critical category? So generally when literary criticism is done, it mainly focuses upon the theme and characterization and depiction of humans and all that. Place is only a background. So should that place, the background, should also be a critical category? And then they want to know how the perspective of man and woman different about nature. Do men write about nature in a different way and women views it in her own way. Another question that bothers an eco-critic is, in what ways has literacy itself affected humankind's relationship to the natural world? So, are we really civilized? Have we adopted some good practices to show how literate we are and concerned about nature? Then a question that how has the concept of wilderness changed over the time? So the pure nature, the wild nature, how that concept has gradually changed, that we will take up in next slides also in detail. So from this it is quite clear that an eco-critic starts interpreting a literary work that depicts nature, and he does an in-depth study of the work that gives special emphasis to nature, and the writers particularly who highlight nature in their subject matter. So those writers get special attention of an eco-critic. Say, we have discussed in the previous sections how Wordsworth and other romantic poets who were lovers of nature, Bate has beautifully made an in-depth study of their works. Then an eco-critic widens his study to include other forms also, like articles, essays, travelogues, essays, memoirs, and literature of local regions. So Glodfelty has given some questions regarding the basic forms of literature like poetry, drama, and fiction. Here other forms of composition are also taken into account, and not only the national writers but the writers of the particular region or other local regions, they are also taken up for the study. So now this thing has widened the scope, and then it also includes things and concepts other than the natural world. To proceed, here is a change in the attitude towards the world. Instead of anthropocentric, man-centered, it has now become earth-centered for eco-critics. An eco-critic shifts nature from mere setting to center of critical analysis. So for him, nature is as important as any other significant character of the work. Then an eco-critic denies the validity of constructivism and rejects the thought that things in this world are constructed linguistically or socially. This is, you can't limit the things of nature by language or society. An eco-critic also lays great importance to environmental values and realize the ethical responsibilities and the needs of the earth. So they are themselves very sensitive, and they try to create an awareness and make the people aware of their ethical responsibilities, which in the long run I would suggest is spiritual responsibility to worry about our house. If we are true, actually the masters of this house, just as a master of the house is worried about keeping it in proper order, we should also have the responsibility in keeping nature in proper order. Now, when we talk about nature and environment, it has 4 areas. The first one is pure nature, that is wilderness, like deserts, oceans that have no intervention of human beings, that are uninhabited, or animals. Then comes the scenic sublime, like other objects like forests, lakes, mountains and hills, cliffs. The third is the countryside, that now a bit of culture is involved. It includes hills, fields and woods. And the fourth one is domestic pictures like parks, gardens and lanes. So in this way, from pure nature, there is a continuum to culture. Obviously, there is a clear shift of attention from inner to outer. Till now, what seemed to be a background is now the center of the discussion. And nature is not a metaphor or a literary device. It is just its own identity there, standing as it is. Then here are various comments and itinerary of a few thoughts. He says the non-human environment is present not merely as a framing device, but as a presence that brings to suggest that human history is implicated in natural history. Human interest is not understood to be the only legitimate interest. So from humans the shift is to earth. Human accountability to the environment is part of the text's ethical orientation. Ecocritics resists the nature-culture dualism and tries re-embedding human beings in nature. So the sacred motto or purpose of an ecocritic is to link humans and nature in such a way that we become a part of nature and consider nature not simply as a background but as an independent entity and in which we live, and therefore should be conscious of keeping it in proper order. Now every theory, every viewpoint has some advantages and disadvantages. No single angle can be complete. So what are the advantages of this theory and what are the disadvantages? We have seen all through that ecocriticism is a proper perspective of looking at work from nature point of view. Such a evaluation of any work can lead to a better assessment of that work and its writer. In addition, the literary artist may use objects of nature like rivers, fog, flowers as symbols to express himself in a better way. But the other side of the coin is that while trying to do an ecocritical study, the critic or the analyst sometimes give too much importance to the part played by nature in a particular work, and thereby he ignores physical world that affect the nature elements. So even physical world is in some way related to nature. So that is often forgotten by an eco-critic. Anyway, we can conclude in the words of Scott Slovic that eco-critics, to do something genuinely meaningful, must offer readers a broader, deeper and more explicit explanation of how and what environmental literature communicates than the writers themselves immersed in their particular narratives can offer. So here the responsibility of the critic is more than that of writer. Writer has already dealt with nature in his own way, but it is the duty of the eco-critic to communicate what writers themselves never knew that they have done in their work. And this often happens. When Eliot used to write his works and some interviewer used to ask some question, he said, I have written, now it is not my problem, it's you to find out the answers or interpret it the way you like. So the job of a critic is much more risky and responsible. Then Slovic goes on to continue, crucial to the eco-critical process of pulling things together and putting them in perspective is our awareness of who and where we are. So while making an eco-critical analysis of a work, the critic very nicely makes us aware about our position, about what our place is in nature and where we stand. Our awareness literally of where we stand in the world and why we are writing. So this is the beautiful job an eco-critic can do, and therefore this theory is also very interesting. So this is all about eco-criticism. I have listed down a few books that I have consulted and used in this presentation, which is in 3 parts, and some of them you can get hold of and study yourself, which will give you a better knowledge. So for the introduction to eco-criticism, Bejon's Romantic Ecology, then Buell's Environmental Imagination, and Jonathan Culler's Literary Theory, a very short introduction, Greg Gerard's Ecocriticism, and of course most important are Charlie Glotfelty, the Ecocriticism Reader, Landmarks in Literary Ecology, and Scott Slovic, the last one, who has written interdisciplinary studies in literature and environment in Central Journal in the field of eco-criticism. He was the founder of the Association of Environmental organization, and is very active in his work on ecology. So I hope you will have a clear idea after going through all the 3 parts of this literary theory. We shall take up some other theory in this way only to have a good idea of what other literary theories are. Okay, till then,